Hello, Ken Spriggs here with part 2 of my new discovery build. Last week we started working on the pod bay and got quite a bit completed on that, including the lab area on the back left. This week I'm working on some more parts for the pod bay walls and also the iconic black and white maintenance corridor, the 8-sided tunnel that Dave Bowman comes through, that we see him carrying the AE35 unit that he uses to replace on the antenna. Definitely some tricky work on that part because I want to light it and I am lighting it. So let's go ahead and take a look at the progress I made on this awesome interior kit. All right, so I got a flat coat onto the inside that I finished, that I showed you the last time. Cover up the decals, and also to keep that paint from getting scratched and damaged. I still have some more work to do on this before I'm ready to put the black detailing on the floor. I have to fashion the connectors for the pod platforms so they can move in and out. And I also started working on the little pieces that go in these little holes right down here. And these weren't holes, these were little divots. Originally, this little piece on the top, which is still resin, was attached onto this. There's two of them. And they were supposed to just glue into those little divots. And then these little Ys are part of photo etch, which I cut out. Now what I did was I cut off these pieces off of all three of these resin tops. And what these are supposed to be is they're supposed to be supporting the pod extenders as they come out and they rest on top of it. And what I discovered in the kit is that they really are supposed to support it. The way it's supposed to work is that you have this piece going into the pod platform, I'm sorry. They go in the pod platform in the bottom of this. So this would go on the end. And then this piece would be going through those little holes right there. And they would just slide back. But there is nothing supporting this piece from going down and the pod platform sticking up or coming up. So I guess the idea is that if there's weight or pod on it, it would put weight on it and it would rest down onto these pieces here. But it's pretty precarious, and I'm not going to use these pieces. I'm going to work out another way. These pieces here, I'm going to use these, but I'm not going to use those. I'm going to use some other kind of metal rod or square, that kind of thing. So what I did to make these more sturdy, I drilled out those holes, and first I used a pin vise to drill out the hole, and I did it while these were still attached onto the connector part, the part that they poured the resin from. So all three of these were still connected. It was easy enough to cut them off, use a pin vise, drill little holes in them, and then just insert some glue or some brass rods with some glue and make them a little sturdier. And I did that on all three. I did use little Y piece, that was the photo etch. There are some other parts that are supposed to go on this number 12 right here. You can see when you cut that out and fold it up, it's a really tiny little straight piece. It's supposed to go, I guess one comes forward this way, and then on the back for the supports. I'm not going to use those either. I'm going to use just some styrene, because once these are glued in place, they're going to be nice and sturdy. But they're not really going to support this anyway. They're just going to be there to show like the mechanism. So let me pop one of these in there and I'll show you what that's going to look like. All right, so you can see set that down. Actually, I can do this. There we go. Okay. There we go. So you can see looks kind of cool. And then the connectors will come out of those two holes and ride over top of this, but it won't be touching or resting on it, so it won't be a problem. And then I can add some extra little bits of styrene in front and maybe in the back. We'll see. But those will probably be fine by themselves, and I'll paint these before I glue them in place. And then what I can do is, since they stick through the bottom, once I glue it in, it's nice and solid, I'll just snip off the bottom and it won't be in the way. So, okay. So those are pretty much done. I'm going to wait to put those in until I finish up the rest of it, because they're a little delicate. I don't want them breaking off and being damaged. So, okay. All right, some more progress on the interior. I painted the roof, the ceiling. I tried to get paint into those openings that are thick there. I want to try to see if that will reflect the light enough, so when you're seeing it from this angle, like you can see right there, that it might just look fine. I might even be able to glue some thin white styrene inside of there as well to really accent that light, and make sure that it goes all the way through and I'm not seeing it offset. I also got the back wall painted. Well, before that I got the tanks glued in. So I didn't paint the tanks first. I glued them in first. I took a little bit of black paint. You really can't see it now, but I put it in those little grooves at the top and the grooves at the bottom and those little recessed areas on the sides, just to kind of make it a little darker. What I think I'll do then is go back with a wash or even a very thin brush and just put some more color into those. But there's at least one decal that goes onto these two tanks. There's a big black decal that goes on this section. There's some red decals for the tanks, decals on the panels below them, and then decals right here in this spot. So quite a few decals on the back wall. Once that's done, then that's an easy job to get that glued into the pod bay. All right, so I'm finishing up the back wall. I have the tanks painted. I just had to use like a little piece of wire and just carefully put in some black in those little stripes and little machinery areas to look like they're detailed. Getting ready to put the decals on. As I mentioned before, the only issue I've had with this entire kit, which is really awesome, this entire interior, is the decals and or the stickers. Decals mainly because they're all one piece, they're not cut out, so you got to really trim around them and put them, to get them to fit. So another issue I've noticed, and I've seen it a couple of times, is that they have these marked incorrectly on the instructions. So for example, those little parts right there, which are clearly those parts, they go right in the center of these, are marked as number 13. But when you look on the instructions, they're marked as 15. Definitely not correct. Likewise, those three black panels there are marked as number 12. Oh, I'm sorry, my bad. Those are number 12. So those are correct. I thought those were wrong. But these are definitely not the right numbers. I have noticed a few others that are marked with the wrong number. So you just have to kind of watch. It's pretty self-explanatory when you're on the sheet. They only, they look a certain way. You can't really mistake them. But just kind of watch. There are some mistakes on the numbering, as I showed there. And you just want to be careful. I'm just even looking. There really isn't any 15 on any of these. There is no 15. It goes up to 14. So it was just a mistake. So just be careful when you're following the instructions if you get this kit. So I still have to cut around where those are going to be, and then I'll go ahead and get those applied, and we'll finish up this area right here. All right, well, that was nerve-wracking. Good God. These decals are so fragile, so thin, so... not happy with these decals, I'm sorry. Again, love this kit, beautiful, everything's beautiful. Really wish they had made some better decals. With all the issues that I've seen in it. And then they're just so fragile, really hard to work with. I just had to be so careful. Letting them dry a bit. I think I'm gonna put down some Walther Solvaset. I just want to be careful. I'm afraid it'll eat them up because it's so fragile. But I got to have those like snug down to it. And then when I give it a full day to dry, I'm going to put a flat coat over that and just seal those decals in. So, but this is done. Looks really good. I mean, it turned out great. And I like the added decals they have, but really wish they would have made these more substantial and cut them out. I mean, that's kind of a given for something like this. You got to cut them out. It's really hard to work with them that way. So, but all right, but this is done. I'm not going to put it in here yet because I still have to do the floor, and I'm real concerned about that. I think what I'm probably going to do is kind of treat these like decals you'd print yourself off of a printer, which might be what they are. For the rest of these, especially this big one, I'm going to put a flat coat over it. I'm just going to go ahead and put a coat over it and let it dry really well. That's what you would do with ones you print yourself. You got to put a clear coat over it and let it dry so it gives it more substantial thickness to it so it doesn't break up. So I'm going to do that because I'm real concerned about this big thing. I can't have any tears in this at all. And this thing's massive. It really is. So, all right. But that's not quite yet on that. I still got a lot of work to do on the interior with the pod platforms and the other things before I put that thing on, because this has got to all be done. That thing's going to be too fragile to be touching. So, all right, but that is all done. Looks really good, and I can go ahead and set that aside for now. Okay, so I'm working on the what I call the maintenance corridor. It's the iconic 8-sided octagonal corridor that we see Dave walking out of, and it's black and white with the weird looking perspective when he's bringing out the antenna unit AE35, I believe, to replace, and we see him walking through that corridor. It's an iconic image, but the entire corridor is white with some black accents on it, and it has a bunch of little lights all around it that light up the corridor, which Kubrick liked doing things like that to give you light from places you didn't expect. So this is really cool. Actually, they have two halves. They're solid resin, and then they have photo etch. The photo etch is the cool part because it has all the detail, and it has openings between where all the parts would be. So it's like one big sheet. You just cut it out as one big sheet, and you just lay it in there. And they're all nicely separated by those little teeny tiny bits of photo etch still. Now, the only issue is I want to light that, and I want to light through those lines that are going this way. But this is solid. So I thought of all these really complicated ways of dealing with it. Complicated, cutting this into pieces, putting clear styrene between them. I even thought about getting some reflective tape, cutting little teeny strips, putting them into those lines there that are open so it would reflect light. Now, it's one of those situations, and I don't know if you other modelers have experienced this, where you just rack your brain and think of all these really bizarre, outlandish ways of doing it. And then you stop and think about the simplest solution that should have just struck you in the beginning that would be 10 times better. And then you feel like, what is wrong with me? Why didn't I see that? Well, this is an example of that. So I mean, this is nice and this is fine, but all it is a smooth 8-sided surface. You're not even really going to see the outside of it or any of that. All you're going to see is the photo etch, and then you have the back. So all I need is something clear, and I thought, well, why didn't they make this in clear? That would have been so much better. But I don't need it to be, because the photo etch is the thing. And the great thing about photo etch is that it doesn't let light through. So the simplest result, which again, I don't know why it took me so long to think it up, is to make my own out of clear styrene. So I did. So all I did was I took some tape, I just taped it over the inside of one of these, trimmed it so it matched, drew some lines just on the parts that bend. And then I took it off and I stuck it on a piece of styrene, and I used an X-Acto knife to score those lines and around it. Cut it out and then just slightly bent those. And there's my replacement piece for that. Because I really don't need that piece. I mean, other than that little dome at the end, I can just glue that on the back if I wanted to, if I needed to, but you're really not even going to see it. So we'll see if I even do that. But you have the back here that would go on the back of this, and I can even fortify the end of it. Plus, of course, I'll frost it and put some, light diffusion, that kind of thing. But let me get and put that in here and show you what it is that I mean by this being such a simple solution. All right, so there we go. So there's the photo etch, and like I said, this is really well designed, so all of that design is nicely put in there, and you can see that only the parts I want to be translucent are translucent. That's the beauty of photo etch. That's really its best feature, is that it blocks out light, and then if you have like holes in a control panel, it lets the light shine through to light up the buttons. Or in this case, it lets the light through so it can light up those panels from outside of it. So what I can do is paint the, sorry, let me set that down, I'll get a closer look. There we go. And you could really appreciate that detail. So all this really is you paint the photo etch all flat white, and then they have some decals, which I probably won't use. I'll use something else, like some self-adhesive stripping or something. But these, get a little pointer here. These little rectangular parts right in the middle are where the black goes. And so you have these all just lined up this way, and so on, all 8 of them. And that's where you get that distinctive look of the white. And then when it's turned and you look at the front of it, you're seeing that iconic image where the black stripes go backwards and give you that perspective. So the only issue is that the light is only supposed to come through these panels here. These would be vertical as I'm looking at it, not these horizontal lines, which there are 8 of them because it's just the separation between the panels. So, but that's an easy fix. All I'd have to do is paint this white, the whole thing, before I put it on the plastic, because I want the plastic to remain translucent. And then, as you can see, the separations between the panels, you have just those 3 little teeny connectors. But otherwise, the panels you want to light are perfectly outlined. They're beautiful. And they're nice because even the little connectors, like I'm using a microscope, even these little connectors are nice to keep these properly spaced until you glue them down onto the surface, which normally would be this, but instead it'll be this. It'll be clear. So I'm just making my own. I don't really care how thick it is. I mean, quite frankly, I could glue extra thick clear pieces on the outside of it. I don't have to worry about masking anything behind these because they're metal. Nothing's going to come through. This area here I could mask off pretty easily, especially even on the back of it. I can simply just tape it off and paint it black so no light is coming through there. And I can, glue on a little dome just like this has right there, just for some detail, which again, you're really not going to see it, but just to kind of keep it in the same accuracy. And then once I do both halves, let me back up a second. So once I paint this all white, and I can even go ahead and put all the black little lines on there before I do anything else with it, then just glue it onto the plastic, trying to make sure that there's only glue on the metal, some CA glue, and it works really well. It glues it down nice and tight. It doesn't come loose. It's really great. And then at that point, I can just go in and snip off these little teeny connectors and simply insert a strip of styrene. Maybe not this one, it's a little big, but I have some thinner ones. But insert a strip of styrene, where I want to light block it. Likewise, I have some other ideas that I can, this is so tiny. Where I could even tape off and just paint black those parts where it bends and block off that area as well, so no light is coming through there. So there's a lot of different ideas I can do, but the main idea is very sound and far better than I was trying to do with anything else, as far as trying to cut this into pieces or drill holes through it or do any of that kind of stuff. Just really unnecessary, since really all this is a smooth 8-sided part in 2 halves, and it has a bit of a lip in the front that goes into the walls. But really, basically, this lip is, I'll just extend this out as far as it goes on that lip. It'll just go right into it. So really happy that I came up with that. I didn't put a ton of effort into cutting up things or trying to find some crazy solution, but instead the simplest is often the best. And sometimes you have to just step back from something and just say, hey, what am I trying to do? What's the best thing I'm trying to do? And in this case, all I needed was something clear behind it that I could put light through. So, all right. So I'll work on that some more too, and come up with a way that I can get that working. And then once I get that together, lighting it from behind is the easiest part. It's just getting some way to have that light come through that fantastic photo etch. It really is well designed. I'm really happy with that. And that's really going to make this job a lot easier now that I'm doing it this way. All right, so back working on the maintenance corridor. I decided to change up a little bit what I was doing. I went ahead and glued the photo etch onto the plastic. I made a second piece, and I glued both of the photo etch parts onto the plastic with some CA glue, and they're all dried, so they're on there really well. And what I figured was, all I'm doing is painting this white, and then I'm putting the black accents on it. So I don't really care if the clear plastic gets painted with a little bit of white. It's still going to be translucent. It'll frost it, and that's what I want anyway, because I don't want to see, clear, I don't want it to be that bright coming through. I want it to dull it down a bit. So it's okay if I paint it white and then put on the black accents and any other details, and then I can just glue these two halves together. And then another idea that I come up with is some very thin strip styrene that I can stick right along here. Since those are clear, but you're not supposed to actually see the, the clear behind it. And then from behind, to mask those lines, which are also the seams, I have some black stripping that I've had for a while. It's self-adhesive. Seems to be the right thickness. All I can do is I can apply it just along that line, that crease on each of these, and on the crease when I glue them together, just to block that line, so the only place that you're going to see light coming through are going to be these lines here, which are separated in between each of these plates. All right, so what I'm going to do now is go ahead and get a coat of flat white on this. Normally I would want to do some primer on this since it's metal, but I don't want the plastic to be gray, so I'm just going to go ahead and do it with the paint, and then I can do a flat coat over it. And it's not going to be handled once it's sealed up as a tunnel, so it's not really going to affect the paint chipping off or anything. So, okay. All right, so I painted the interiors of the corridor, the maintenance corridor, white, and they're still translucent. The light will still shine through the lines. So what I'm doing now is I'm adding on the little black bits that go along the length of it to give it that distinctive look. So the kit comes with decals, and it has all of these. Now, if these were separate decals that I didn't have to cut every little teeny one out, these would work just fine, because there's 38 of them, so quite a lot. So I didn't really want to fuss with them and go through and use an X-Acto knife and cut around each one, or cut as close as I can. And plus they're so fiddly, as I talked about in my last video. So what I decided to use instead is the same material that I used on my scratch built corridor for my original Discovery build. And I have this really thin black self-adhesive striping. And you would use this for like a race car or a model car or whatever. And it comes in a big strip. And I've had this for a couple of years, obviously. So I'm using a similar method. On the original one, I would cut a strip, and it was a little thicker, so I think this was the right thickness. And I would tape it on to pretend this is the plastic piece that I made. I just put a piece on, then I'll take the X-Acto knife and just snip down to where I want it to be. And then put a few scratches in, but I didn't really care because you weren't really going to see it. And it was all just styrene that I was using. Now, with these are photo etch, and they're painted, and I don't want to scratch them, obviously, so I can't do that. So what I determined is I used the decal to figure out the size, since they made them to be the correct size for this photo etch. And I took a piece of thin styrene, and I just lined it up and marked it off with a felt tip marker to get the right length that I wanted. And then I just take this, it's my gauge, as it were. So I put a piece of, I have a long piece just adhered down to this piece of styrene. So what I do, let me try to zoom in a bit. Sorry, so So I take this and I line it up on the edge, and it gives me a rough length. They don't have to be perfect, they just have to be kind of close. So I take my X-Acto knife and I just press it down and I cut the piece so I get the right length. Pick it up. I usually just put it off to the side so I can work with it a little better. Let me get these out of the way a second. And you can see that I've already done several on this one so far. All right, so now it's the right length, but it's too thick. So it's pretty much just half of the thickness. So I take my X-Acto knife again and I just kind of center it. And again, press down and it just cuts it in half. Now in this case, it pulled one up. It doesn't normally do that, but that's okay because I can use it anyway. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna put it back down. I want to try to get it under the corner as thin as I can. And then this way, it's easier, hope you can see this in frame, to just kind of lay it down. And I just put my finger on it to pull it off. Nope. And then just move it into place. Okay, now that one's actually a little short. So we'll take that off. Sorry. And I'm going to do that again. I'm going to discard those two. Okay. Let me try that again. And again, I'm just eyeballing it. But if I get a piece that's the wrong length or whatever, I can just go ahead and do it again. It's no big deal. I've got plenty of this. Okay. There we go. And then it sticks, but it is still movable. So what I can do is just kind of use the tip of the blade to drag it to center it. All right, once I get it centered, then give it a slight press. And then I'll just follow through and finish up the rest of these. And when it's all done, I'm going to put a flat coat over top of the whole thing, which will seal in these self-sticking pieces. And they're really not going to be accessed and touched, so they're not going to fall off or have a problem because they're inside. So then when you're done, you're going to get this look. Or if I angle it a bit, that's how it's going to look. And obviously you're only going to see it from the side because it's going to be inside against the wall, and you know the doorway, you're going to see through it, and you're just going to see those lines, and it's going to look pretty cool. And when it's all done, there will be light shining through the back and illuminating those. So you have your vertical black little lines, and then you're going to have your horizontal lines that are going to light up, and that's going to look accurate to the interior. So all right, so that's going to be pretty cool. And already pretty well almost done with this one. And then I just have to do the remainder for the second one, and then I'll be able to start getting those put together. Okay. All right, so just about ready to start putting together the maintenance corridor. I took some very thin styrene stripping round stock, which I think is .020, and I cut off some pieces and stuck it in those little gaps between. They're not quite light blocking, but what I can do is I can paint those lines once I get it together. And a lot of the light's just going to be evenly distributed within the corridor, so you're not really necessarily going to see that anyway. I also started working on the back wall that I'm going to have this attached to, and I figured the best way to go about it, that will not only help me to secure these in and have them bent to the right way, but I can also have something to put on some pieces of styrene to light it. So I took the actual parts and I just cut out a little section from the end that goes against this wall anyway, because these two pieces just completely fit around the edge of this wall. And then I just scraped away some of the paint and I used some CA glue to glue them down, and they're hardening on there right now. So a couple of things that we'll do is it will allow, you can see that little gap, because there are some places like on the sides, on the end up there, also you can see the angles where the photo etch comes right up against the detail here. The bottom it doesn't, there's a bit of an open space, but that side does, you can see, and over here. So this angle, this side of course, this angle, this end, angle, and this end here. So it gives me a nice solid backing to glue this piece of styrene against it, and it'll push it into the right angles so that you have each of the parts where they need to be. Let me see where okay, because there was actually a keyed notch. So this is the top, the bottom of course, and sides. So this is how it goes. And I know how these go because you have this piece, which these two panels are this one and the side one, and then the one on this end goes on the top. The bottom of this is the bottom, that kind of thing. So I can put them into place, and then when I'm done, when I get them together, I can just fill in the two little gaps with some more of the thin styrene to block off that area from the inside. And like I said, then I can do more masking on the outside along that line. And then when this is done, what I can do is, if you're looking at it like this, each of these pieces allows me to take a piece of styrene strip and bring it out this way, all four sides, and I will have an SMD in it facing inward and lighting it. And then I'll also finish off these ends over here. I'll show you that once I get it going. That's pretty much what I did on my original one that I made myself. And then that's enough of a room to give it a nice glow and to fill in this whole area and light all those up with the warm white SMD. So okay, so I will let those dry really solid, and then we'll start looking at getting this here together. All right, so I completed gluing the two halves of the maintenance corridor onto the back piece that I modified with these extra parts. Worked out pretty well. I had to do some cutting down of some of these pieces. They weren't fitting quite right. Took me several tries to get those to fit in there correctly. And then once I got them in there, it was a bit tricky to get some of the parts to marry together, but that looked pretty good. It looks like a good joint right there. Had to use a combination of CA glue and 5-minute epoxy there on the bottom to get that to stick in there and stay together. The other side, also not quite as as good as I wanted it, but it's the part that you're really not going to see. So if you look at it on set, the top is really pretty much perfect. Perfect angles. The sides start to slope to the side a bit, and then the bottom's a little bit out. Primarily because these two halves were not perfect. There were a few discrepancies. Really couldn't cut them down anymore to make them work because I'll be cutting into the photo etch, so I just made do. I'll just have to adapt the inside, carve out just a little bit on the bottom of this opening so that will fit. And I'll mostly do it over here on the left side so it's not going to be visible again, like I said. And that way it'll fit into that opening right there and glue in well. So, but I went ahead and glued the stripping onto those two remaining parts. I'm letting that dry. Then once that's dry, I'll just snip them off at the top. So this wall's all ready to go. I just have to do a little more light masking and then work on the lighting. So as I was talking about, you can probably get a better idea now of what I'm talking about. So the way that this was going to work is, let's see, this is the top. Turn that around. I can tell because that's where that get over there. Yep, thought it was right there. That's where that little key part was on. That's the top. And that's how I arrange the walls. So what's going to do generally is I'm going to take this strip styrene and I will cut it to length, cut out a hole and embed an SMD into it so it's facing inside in towards the walls. And then let me just try it over on this side here, a little better to see. And I'll have these on all four sides, the top, the bottom, both sides. And that piece of resin that I cut off to put in there will be a nice place to rest it, glue it on, and it will give it a nice little gap to allow a little bit of separation for the light to diffuse. And I'll do this with all four of them, so I'll have one on each side. And then these other sides, I'll just put styrene over it, just fill that in. I'm not going to have 8 lights. It's a little overkill. But 4 is just fine. And then once I get all 8 of those around, I'll paint it black on the outside to mask it, to keep the light inside. And then it will nicely diffuse the light throughout that whole compartment. And the nice thing is too, is that every single wall has light shining in, which is illuminating the other walls. It's sort of like its own little mini light box. So it does a good job of diffusing the light as well, and giving an even lighting to the entire interior. So it'll light up the white panels. It'll also highlight those panels that are shining through the lights. So that's going to be good. That's going to work and do what I need to do. I may have to cut another piece like this. Sorry. And put it, I'd have to put it like about here. I don't want to cover this, obviously. This is the part that lights. And this is going to go into the kit. So I don't know if I will. I'm probably just going to have that piece coming out and just gluing straight onto the inside wall of the kit. So I can have the light glued on like this and just glued at the one end, not glued anywhere over here. Because there's not a whole lot of room to put anything there unless I put like just a little peg or something. We'll see. I might do something like that. But again, I don't want the light to be affected. I want the light to be nice and open through this whole area. Since I'm lighting 1, 2, 3, all 4 of these little lines going this way. All of those have to be lit. So, okay. One other thing that I need to do before I do any of the lighting is to finish light blocking the seam lines. Because because you can see some light is still coming through even though I put these strips on. So these lines here have to be light blocked. I thought about using paint. I also tried some of this black stripping. It just doesn't really work too well. And I'm afraid if I tape it and paint it, it might bleed through and cover the parts that I want to be lit. So I thought of a better idea, and it'll serve two purposes. I'm going to get some JB Weld, and I'm going to mix it up because it's opaque and it's a very strong epoxy, and just lightly spread it along those lines, all the seams. So it'll do two things. It will light block, but it will also further seal those seams since they are just bent clear styrene, and I don't want those cracking at some point in the future and opening up. And I can also use it at the bottom to further cement in these parts and light block there as well. So okay, so coming along very well. I will continue working on this, and almost to the point where I can start putting some lights on it and just see how it's going to look. Okay, so there's the completed corridor with all of the JB Weld, filling in those seams so that you're only going to see the light coming through where it's supposed to on the inside. This is nice and solid. All right, so this part is complete. I had to carve out a little bit of that opening there on the top mostly, and on this side, on the left side, to get it to fit in, but it does fit in. So let me go ahead and put this in there, and I will show you how that's going to look. All right, so I'm just holding a warm white SMD behind it, so it's not illuminating all of those light strips, but you can see the idea of how that's going to work. And it will be much more evenly lit once I get lights all around it. But that's what you're going to be able to see back there. See that back corridor. You're really not going to see the other side of that wall. I mean, you can see it through this door, but you're not going to be able to look through that door once the pod bay is all put together. You're just going to see through this side, or you can see straight on, which all you're going to see is the back wall in the bottom, where you're going to see back there. So okay, so that's going to be pretty cool. See, I'm just holding that back there. Okay, so that photo etch is awesome. It really turned out well. I think that's going to be pretty cool once that gets all wired up and attached permanently to the pod bay. All right, so I put the back wall in there just to kind of get an idea of how that's all going to look. And again, the lights in the back in the corridor are not all lit, so you're only seeing like a part of it. But just to give you that kind of idea there on how this is going to work. How it's all coming together. The back isn't glued on, it's just kind of stuck into place for now, so it's not permanently attached, but that's looking pretty sweet. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and wrap up this video. Sorry, trying to get a focus here for this week. Get in there, focus up. I still have to finish working on the pod platform connections, and I'll show you that next week, and we'll go over that. And I have to finish the details on the front here as well before I'm ready to go ahead and put that decal on there and finish that up. And there's some other things to work on too. Sorry for the flickering, it's just wired together hastily. But coming pretty close to finishing up the pod bay part, and then I'll start working on the cockpit somewhere down the road here in a few weeks. All right, so that's going to do it for this week on my progress on the Discovery. Pod bay is coming along really, really well. Really getting most of it completed. Once I get hashed out the pod platforms so they can extend and retract, then I'll be able to finish up the other details on the quad bay and start getting it together. Starting to look at some lighting options and figuring out what lights I'm going to need, and start getting those together as well for this project. So stay tuned. Definitely some good progress, and this is going to look pretty sweet when it's all completed. So all right, thanks again to all my new subscribers, and I will see you next time.